All right, world, we've got another Facebook Live here today. I actually think, Scott, that this is going to be our last one of the year because next week we've got Christmas and the New Year's. So I think this may be our last one until 2023. In any case,
Ooh.
I'm Sam Lichtenstein, and I'm really excited to be here with Scott Carlos, one of our Asia Pacific analysts, to talk about actually making headlines today, right, Scott? Huge news out of Japan, or actually, is it?
It is and it isn't, Sam. So you got a good point. A lot of people are talking about this, and well, what it is the Japanese government just kind of announced a big update on three policies: the national security strategy, the national defense strategy, and the defense buildup program. Now, these are there's a lot going on. Japan has been in the process of remilitarizing. I think I've written a few articles about this. We had a few podcasts on this, and people talk about it a lot. But basically now Japan is able to take more proactive defense, which sounds like a kind of a contradiction in terms. I always find that amusing.
I mean, this
Because
is also a country that has the Japanese Self-Defense Forces, which is basically just the military.
yeah, and they're I think the eighth largest spenders on defense in the world. And so by the time by 2027, sorry, by 2027, Japan will increase their defense spending by 1% of their GDP. So they're basically going to double it. So then they will be the third largest spender on defense in the world, assuming all things are equal. Right now, they're spending around $40 billion. They're going to spend anywhere between 80 and 90 billion by the end of 2027. And yeah, they are very much pushing the interpretation of self-defense. I have to put that in quotes because there are restrictions on what they've done. So, for example, they said they're going to acquire Tomahawk missiles. These are long-range cruise missiles from the United States. I grew up seeing some of them on CNN when I watched the conflict in Kosovo. And so these have a range of about 1,200 kilometers or about 800, 900 miles. These are far longer than Japan has now. And they will allow Japan to do what they just said they just gave themselves power to do, and that's actually strike into enemy territory or enemy infrastructure, key infrastructure during a conflict. So before, Japan was not allowed by their own policies to strike at, for example, we'll just say country A is fighting them. They couldn't take an offensive strike. They can only take actions to defend themselves. Now they're interpreting that defense as saying, well, if you're launching missiles at us, we can shoot your missile silos to prevent you from launching missiles at us. So that's a big policy change. And like you said, this isn't really new. This has been going on for the better part of a decade. Former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had done this. Right now, Kishida is pushing this. He's carrying the torch. This is a very long-standing policy of the Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP, that's been running Japan since 1945, basically, or 1950s.
So, Scott, I mean, this is kind of obvious, but taken in response to, from what I see, as three threats, right? There's China, North Korea, and Russia. I mean, these are the three countries that Japan has named in all of its various military documents for some time now. They haven't necessarily named them explicitly in their 2013 doctrine, the last time they formally updated this, but in all of these times since then, it's been clear that these are the three countries that they're talking about. So I guess I'm wondering, is this actually going to lead to anything sea change in the near future? Or is this part of a much longer term process that ultimately doesn't really have much meaning right now?
This is definitely part of a longer term process. We will not see an immediate change. I just saw a question someone asked regarding North Korea, if Japan would fire missiles back at North Korea. That is not going to happen. There's a lot of things that go into that. But unless North Korea actually hits Japanese land with a missile, I cannot see a scenario where Japan launches a missile at North Korea. Now, like you said, Sam, yes, North Korea is one of the belligerents that Japan has mentioned. China, they named as a major challenge in the region. And obviously Russia, they're still technically at war with. They still dispute the Isles, the Kurils, I believe the Russians call it. Japan calls it the Northern Territories. So they have disputed claims there. And they're very much worried about Russian aggression in the Far East, despite the fact that Russia is currently embroiled in a conflict in the west of Russia, in Ukraine. So, and when you mention China, obviously the big elephant in the room everyone wants about Taiwan. That is very much a concern for the Japanese the Japanese government is concerned about any conflict in Taiwan would inherently spill over into Japanese territory, specifically Okinawa, where the United States military bases are. And they're very concerned that it would start there and it could just drag Japan entirely into a conflict. So they want to be very much prepared for that.
All right. So if I'm understanding right, basically what we take away from this is there's a whole lot of announcements that have happened over the past day or so. A lot of them are based on longer term things that we've seen coming for some time, but there's still, at least rhetorically, a shift in that respect. Over time, we're going to see some more of these capabilities come online. So I'm going to really put you on the spot here now, Scott, and ask a question because, I mean, from the United States point of view, of course, we want Japan to be taking a more active role. Obviously, it's in a very strategic area of the world where there are three enemies of Japan that we just named that are also I shouldn't say enemies, but at least strong competitors, adversaries of the United States. How does a third country that we haven't spoken about yet, South Korea, interpret this? Because Japan and South Korea, of course, have long-standing history of animosity since World War II, and this has been a huge problem for the United States because, of course, we would love our two biggest East Asian allies to come closer together, but they can't get over a lot of their historical baggage.
Yeah, it's a good thing you bring that up. Japan and South Korea, like you mentioned, have a long-standing history. Goes back to World War II, pre-World War II, 1895. A lot of people might say it started in the modern age, I should say. Then you also have Japan. Did mention they still claim islands. They call it Takeshima. South Korea calls it Dokdo. Internationally speaking, you'll probably see it in Google as the Liancourt Rocks. Both sides claim the territory. South Korea was angry that Japan still claims Takeshima, as they call it, as their territory. But in reality, South Korea has a very big vested security interest in Japan remilitarizing and continuing along this path. Specifically because South Korea would really like Japan to help them with North Korea, is like the biggest dog and biggest kind of elephant in the room again. To some extent, Russia and definitely China. Obviously, like you mentioned, America is two biggest allies, South Korea and Japan in the region. South Korea is very worried about being caught in the middle of any U.S.-Chinese conflict. And so having Japan to kind of help them, back them up in whatever choice they make would definitely be a big welcome for the South Koreans.
All right, I bet you didn't think that I was going to put you on the spot with the South Korea question, but as I know you've been covering as well. So all I'll say is if this is in fact our last Facebook Live for the year, Scott, all of our listeners out there, make sure that you know that we're going to be putting out, for those of you who have access, our strategic and tactical forecasts at the start of the new year. So look out for those. You can learn more about our outlook for the Asia Pacific from our analyst team, including Scott, in those documents. Otherwise, Scott, thanks for taking the time. To the rest of the world out there, thanks for being with us. Come visit us at ranenetwork.com. That's RANE network.com, and enjoy the holidays.
Happy holidays. Glad to be here, Sam.